Hello, everyone. This is the latest edition of the Ad Petri Sedem interview series. In this series, we interview figures of influence who are shaping the culture through their work, and we discuss with them the links, sometimes weird, sometimes not so weird, between Catholicism and culture. This Substack and blog is under the patronage of Saints Peter and Paul and Pope St. John Paul II. We're very delighted to have your company today. My name is Ishmael Adibo. I'm the chief editor of this Substack, and I'm very happy to have you guys today. If you would like to access the Substack online, it's at petrisedem.substack.com. I'll leave that in the show notes. And if you would like to know more information about my guest today, I will leave the links to that information in the show notes. I'm very delighted to be joined today by Dr. Kristin Collier of the University of Michigan Medical School. And I'll just go over her biography here for those who may not be familiar with her work, who are just meeting her for the first time. So Dr. Kristin Collier is an assistant professor of internal medicine at the University of Michigan, where she also serves as the director of the University of Michigan Medical School's program on health, spirituality, and religion. In addition, she is an associate program director for the university's internal medicine residency training program. Dr. Collier's academic work focuses on the intersection of spirituality, religion, and medicine, with peer-reviewed articles published in prestigious journals such as the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, the Annals of Internal Medicine, and the Journal of General Internal Medicine. Her professional focus is deeply informed by her remarkable personal journey. Once a self-described pro-choice atheist, Dr. Collier's experiences as a physician wrestling with patient suffering, combined with key personal encounters, led her to become a committed Christian and a vocal pro-life advocate. Today, she is a prominent voice in the discussion around the role of faith, conscience, and deeply held beliefs in the practice of modern medicine. She is also a wife and a proud mother of 4 boys. Dr. Collier, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, of course, of course. So, Dr. Collier, we've been corresponding for a while. I'm glad that you've been able to get on the interview today. So, we were talking before this. This is for my viewers, of course, about the friendly rivalries that exist between the University of Michigan and other universities. Are you a fanatic in any sort of way, or?
I mean, yes. I came to Michigan as an undergrad in 1993, and so I am a Wolverine through and through. So a huge University of Michigan sports fan, and sort of not a fan of anybody else who
Uh,
is
um,
playing us,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, we're definitely not going to be friends after this because I'm Michigan State. It's all fun. It's all fun, I promise.
It can be its own religion for sure, right? Sort of the fanfare, the symbols, the like get-togethers around the topic, especially Michigan football. It's a sight to behold.
Yeah, yeah. Especially the Michigan Ohio games. I think that's
Yeah.
the biggest college football rivalry in the country, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah, it probably is up there as one of the biggest for sure. Have you been to the Big House before?
No, I've never been to the Big
Oh,
House.
okay.
I have
Okay, we gotta
seen
get you.
there was one game between U of M and Michigan State in 2021 where we beat you guys. Go.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, maybe if we get you to come out to the Big House, we can with religious language, we can make you a convert.
Convert. That not gonna happen.
Miracles can happen. Yeah.
Not gonna happen. All right. In more serious matters. No, I'm kidding. So Dr. Collier, I noted in your bio your work on the University of Michigan and
Mm,
medical school and on the pro-life front.
yeah.
Before we get into your work at the medical school, I imagine for those who are most familiar with your work, the rather famous episodes in your life was the keynote address you gave to the incoming medical school students at the University of Michigan in 2022. But before we discuss that, I wanted to maybe just talk for a bit about your journey into medicine. What led you ultimately to decide to go into internal medicine? And were you always concerned with the deeper philosophical questions that you sought to answer throughout your career?
That's a good question. I mean, regarding like my vocational choice, I don't remember actually ever discerning career and vocation. I can't remember a time when I didn't want to be a doctor. My
Uh,
mom always laughs that it's because when I was a baby, my dad would whisper in my ear, like, you can do anything you want after you graduate from medical school, right? So I was probably indoctrinated at a young age, but like all joking aside, like I can't imagine like outside of being a member of clergy and our parents, like the importance of being able to take care of human beings in a time of great need and to help people navigate their health, illnesses, and the increasingly complicated healthcare system. It's a great privilege. So like I mentioned, you mentioned that I have four sons and other commitments, but if I do have to miss things with my family or the boys, at least knowing that when I'm not with them, I'm able to do this work, which is a great gift to be able to do. I'm helping folks navigate some really challenging things. Internal medicine, you asked about specifically internal medicine. So internists are physicians who take care of adults. So I can take care of technically anyone 17 and above. Most of my patients are over the age of 65, I would say. I've taken care of them since I picked them up as an intern at Michigan Hospital in 2001. So they've been my patients for like 25 years. And it's a real joy to take care of these folks. Internal medicine is a broad profession. So it keeps me on my toes, but it's great. I get to see patients across the lifespan as adults. I get to navigate not only chronic illnesses with them through a partnership with the patient, but also manage preventative care, acute undifferentiated symptoms, and it's never boring. It's really a great privilege. Your
yeah.
second question, I wish I could give you a better answer to this question. Most of my life, I had not been really focused on questions around philosophy or really big matters of any existential concern. And really, I think because of the focus of my education and because of my upbringing, I would say that I was just focused in the realm of biomedical science. I was a biology major at Michigan, went straight into medical school, then studied obviously the medical sciences, was raised, I would say, as a secular humanist, so never really had any cultivation of thinking about philosophical topics. And it wasn't until my baptism in 2016 that I realized like I had a really I think, lovely opportunity to explore the sciences, but I really had had an impoverished education because I hadn't considered the topics I should be considering as a doctor. Like, what is a human being? What is a person? Like, what is the nature of suffering? Like, thinking about sort of these higher things that I never had the opportunity to engage. And so I've been on this like frantic catch up sort of journey, asking people, what should I be reading? Like, which conferences should I go to try and fill in these like massive craters in my education and really in my person. So it's been a journey since then to fill in these gaps.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the point of a sort of re-education on your
Yeah.
part, given the we'll talk about the humanities and the need for
Mm.
humanities in medical school in a moment, but that search for deeper questions, and I imagine this what made your practice of internal medicine a bit more fun. You mentioned
Oh,
in a way, so
for sure. I mean, you always, I think, I lament the fact that I didn't have my faith when I was a medical student and a resident. And I think now about the way that my faith has made the beautiful work that I do every day really come alive in like a technicolor.
mm,
Um, it's beautiful to understand the complexity of God's creation and the majesty and the miracle of human life in a way that I appreciated, but really not properly appreciated before. Or really, I think because of this biomedical reductionism that I had fallen into, I think some of the mystery had been stripped away. And I'm just so thankful to have that now. And even just because I practice primary care and I take care of, patients one-on-one in a healthcare setting, just even to be able to see them in the fullness of who they are. They're not just a bag of blood and bones, or life isn't just molecules in motion, but I'm taking care of people who are made in the imago Dei, in the image of God. I mean, that instantly transforms that space into one that's sacred and makes it even more infused in meaning that I then in a way that's really gives a name to it that I sort of sensed but really wasn't sure how to describe it. So it's given me this new language, this new appreciation for the work that I do, and a new appreciation just for the created order and my role in it.
Yeah. Touching upon just staying on that topic for a
Sure,
moment,
sure.
the your early years as a doctor.
Mm,
Now, of course, this links to your keynote address in
mm,
2022. As a young doctor, probably even an internist, you talk about the sort of the reductionist view in medicine, seeing patients as a sort of, oh, for lack of a better phrase, a problem to get by, a
right,
problem to pass. Was this your
right.
experience as a young internist?
Yeah, it's I so I trained in a time in medicine before we had some of the protections around trainees, around work hour restrictions
Mm.
and a focus on wellness. I don't remember ever hearing the word burnout or moral distress or moral injury when I was training. It was a really tough time to train, and um, especially sort of training at an academic, tertiary medical center like the University of Michigan. We take care of people who oftentimes are transferred to us because nobody else knows what to do, or because they're so acutely ill that they have to, thank goodness we have the technical capabilities oftentimes to really assist people through critical illness. But we have a pretty high acuity, So when I rotated in our ICUs when I was a medical student or a resident, our acuity sometimes was like, 20%. And I saw a lot of death and dying and suffering. And the average
Mm.
person just isn't, equipped to deal with that, to really process what you see there. And because of the fast-paced nature of medicine and sort of this hyper efficiency and oftentimes the compartmentalization of emotions that has to happen in some way to take care of patients, there was not a way to be healthy and to process that. And so that what happens is you either to protect yourself from disintegrating, you either start to emotionally wall yourselves off from so the suffering you see, and then ultimately that removes you really from the person to person connection that you went into medicine to have, or you start to cope in some other unhealthy way. And there's no surprise that physicians have a high rate of addiction and alcohol misuse and divorce. And there's many reasons for that. So I definitely was in that, starting to be in that bucket of like a disenchantment, a thick callus that had been built on my skin, and a removal of myself in a way that I think was trying to be protective. And what happens when when physicians or elder healthcare professionals get burnt out, they start depersonalizing the patient in front of them. And what happens then is that becomes a patient safety issue. And really, again, sort of starts this cycle where providers and healthcare professionals lose the meaning of why they went into medicine in the first place, which is to take
Yeah.
care of human beings. And so I do believe I was in this evolving cycle of nihilism and cynicism and a thick callus and maladaptive behaviors that I had built to try to protect myself. And I was in a bad spot, and I'm very thankful. It's a process that is really hard when you go through these existential questions of like, how do we make sense of the suffering that we see? Like, what's going on here? This wrestling with God that I think I went through after my training here. But something beautiful can be born out of a period of suffering and a period of discernment. And out of that growth, I'm very thankful to have a new perspective. Not that we ever have a totally right way of being clear about the suffering that we see on the side of heaven, but at least I have a sense of peace around the fact, around God's sovereignty, and the promise of a day when the great physician will make all things new and will wipe every tear away, and the resurrection of bodies. Like I didn't have any moral imagination around those topics before, and I'm just so thankful that I do now.
Yeah. Yeah, especially that, that grounding of faith that, took you through those years. I imagine a great thought exercise, especially for the incoming students. W- you know, um, for med school students, a good thought exercise would be to maybe they've gone through medical school, maybe they're interning. A good thought experiment would be, okay, let's take you back to when you were interviewing for, medical school applications. And the central question, why did you want to become a doctor? Compare that to your, 4 or so years that you went through medical school. Is that the reason sustaining you today as you're interning, as you're, going on this journey to become a doctor? And you mentioned the burnout, not that it existed in your time.
It did. We just
Yeah,
didn't have a name for it.
yeah,
We didn't
yeah,
talk about it,
yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah.
The burnout, the long hours, and the need for those protections on the part of doctors and medical students, that they're less they're more equipped through their work to view their patients as persons, because this is a deeply personal exercise.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I think, there has been, rightly so, a focus on work-life integration or work-life balance and duty hours and making sure people have enough time outside of the hospital to do things that are meaningful to them. But, and also, we know that I believe firmly that if we don't find a way also to make meaning in the 80 hours or so that we're at work, I mean,
Mm,
after work yoga is great, running is great, spending time with your dog and your family and people outside of medicine is great. But you also need to find a way to find meaning in like the tons of hours that you're at work every day, because you spend a lot of time here. So to be able to make sure that there's a sense of meaning in the work that you have here is really important. And this idea of, I think, yeah, of making sure that we remember like why we did this in the first place. And I look at a lot of personal statements and applications, and most people say, I want to help human beings. But then
yeah.
what we do is we lose sight of that. And even the language, I have an interest in narrative medicine, which is language and medicine. And you think about the language we use even in medicine. So, people come into medicine, they say they want to take care of human beings. And then you hear them sort of later on when they maybe think about pursuing a specialty. I want to take care of people with diabetes, which sounds great. But then later you hear and they say, I manage diabetics, the language shifts. And all of a sudden the person becomes lost a
Mm,
little bit in that. And then sometimes you ask, people after their fellowship, let's say they're an endocrinologist, and you're like, what do you do? What do you do for a living? And they're like, I manage diabetes. Like then the person's completely lost. We went from
yeah.
human to a person living with illness to like losing the person and just naming sort of the illness within that sometimes very short time, a few years. And it's that loss of a focus on the person, which not only is, I would say, bad for the physician, because that's why we went into medicine. Taking care of someone who has inherent worth and viable dignity is where the meaning is within medicine. But it's bad for the patient too.
Mm,
And so the study was to look at how we use language in clinical care. Because sometimes people say, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, who cares if I say I'm managing a diabetic versus a person living with diabetes versus I manage diabetes? Like, who the heck cares? And actually, the language does actually influence patient care. There was a study in JAMA looking at actually language in the medical record, like when we all, dictate our notes, and our notes is our way to communicate with our colleagues asynchronously and sometimes back to ourselves in a future way when we read our note later. And when words are used to sort of that sort of dehumanize certain groups of patients, like their care actually is at risk, their care is worse. Also was a study looking at adults taking care of sick babies. It was a NICU simulation in the neonatal ICU, and looked at these two teams that had equal medical knowledge, equal expertise about how they resuscitated a sick kid in this simulation. And one of the teams was exposed. They said, you're going to have an observer with you. One of the teams just had like a neutral observer. The other team had this observer that subjected the team to sort of rude language. And the team that was subjected to the rude language, their diagnostic and procedural skills went down. So language does matter. It's just not a way like, oh, doctors have the sixth sense of humor. It's a way for us to blow off steam and no one really cares. Actually, the patients do worse when we use language that dehumanizes and surrounds our team with that toxicity. So yeah, no, language absolutely does impact patient care. There's tons of data on it for your listeners who are interested in looking at narrative medicine stuff. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. It's something that needs to be reintroduced in medical school.
Yeah, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure.
no doubt. Let's move on to your
Yeah.
keynote address of 2020.
Mm,
Of course, it's famous because some students, because of your pro-life views, which were
mm.
online before then, they protested against you giving the address.
the machine man understands only chemistry, and he is contemptuous of the land and of himself. What if I substituted the word patient in for the word land? He becomes contemptuous of the patient and of himself. I'm sure you've heard a lot about the crisis of physician burnout. This syndrome and its causes are very complex, but the result of burnout is depersonalization, where you can start seeing the patient in front of you, the one that you went into medicine for, as a non-person, and you can become truly contemptuous of the patient. There's just something in your way of getting out of this place, and your feelings toward yourself can become disordered as well. You will soon start learning a lot of biochemistry, a lot of pharmacology, a lot of histology, and that's great. The science is really beautiful, and there's so much science to know. But the risk of this education, and the one that I fell into, was that you come out of medical school with a bioreductionist, mechanistic view of people, and ultimately of yourself.
Why did you give this sort of address to the students at this specific time period? What was your motivation?
Mm. So it's a big deal to be asked to give the white coat address, because
I'm sure.
we have a lot of faculty, and to be asked to give it is a big honor. And I would say a lot of us think it's a bigger honor than giving the graduation speech, because you are, you know, the first person at the medical school formally, right, to welcome the new students in the vocation. And I gave that talk because it was a talk that I wish I had heard, when I was in that same auditorium at Hill Auditorium in Ann Arbor. So thought about, I didn't have much time to put the talk together, to be honest, because I wasn't sure if I was going to be allowed to give the talk.
Yeah.
And there was like a lot of drama around that time. And then like once I had the time to put together the talk, it wasn't a ton of lead time, to be honest. But I thought, what would the younger Kristin would have what would she have needed to hear back at that point when you're scared? I mean, med school is a scary endeavor, right? To be in that seat at Hill Auditorium, being welcomed into this work that you know is going to be incredibly grueling. So it's a talk I wish I maybe had heard either at that point or at some point during my training.
How did you manage the the very visceral negative feedback that you received at the time that you gave the address and sometime afterwards?
So the address was surrounded before and after with a lot of drama. And I totally get that. I mean, there's a lot of emotion around abortion, the topic of abortion. And at that time, it was just a perfect storm of detail, right? So it was June, it was June 2022. I had been asked to give the talk. An interview came out on the Pillars website that I had done with Charlie Camosi about my conversion from a pro-choice person to a pro-life physician. Then like that same day that the interview came out, the Dobbs decision came out, and then there's like a lot of emotion around abortion, because abortion gets at these fundamental topics that all of us feel very deeply about, right? Bodily autonomy, women's health, questions around resources, all of these things. And so that I became like that lightning rod a little bit at my place for
Right.
all that emotion. It was just a sort of a perfect storm. Um, and it was hard, I have to say that it was really professionally and personally hard to go through that time. But also, I was a pretty militant pro-choice person for 40 some years. And I felt like if that had been me as a medical student, I would have been someone that would have been protesting and walking out. And, so like, I can't really have anger at anybody around this. We all are entitled to our deeply held beliefs and should stand up for what we firmly believe. And I just, whenever I got sort of a little bit upset about it, I would think, I'm just really grateful, I guess, that I have had the opportunity for the scales to have been lifted off my eyes about these topics, only because of the grace of God and through encounters with people who have helped me think about things in a radically different way. Not everybody else has had that opportunity, and I can't begrudge or hold myself up in higher esteem over that. It's just all God's grace. And in the aftermath of the walkout, there were a lot of opportunities to like, the media got a hold of like my cell phone and my husband's cell phone and my email, and like you won't find me on any show talking about it. The reason for that is because I just remember all the time that Jesus was silent and all the space that makes for grace and mercy. And I think our response to things shouldn't look like the world. If it does, maybe we're doing something wrong. So it just was a time to really reflect, to have patience, and to realize that there's a lot of emotion around this. And I just happened to be the person that that was directed against. And, it's just something that you learn a ton from.
Staying on the note of your
Yeah.
keynote address, and I imagine this was just a heartbreaking episode in your life as a
Mm.
physician. Um, the tragic story of your friend and
Mm.
fellow med school resident Jake. Now he had been aiming for a fellowship position in academic cardiology. Suddenly he became sick and was diagnosed. I believe it's called liver lesions.
So he presented with like lesions in his liver, but it was the presentation of a widely metastatic cancer, really rare, bad cancer that he had. That's right. Hmm.
And for my audience, that what we were just talking about was the it's an enlarged liver due to
Yes.
cancerous
Yes.
masses. Unfortunately, he died due
He
to that
did.
illness. As you mentioned in your address, that exposed you to the limitations of medicine. How did this
Hmm.
affect you
Hmm.
as a physician? I imagine this must have been so heartbreaking for you.
This was hard. I mean, this was at the end of my residency, so I was at my most burnt out, most fatigued, right? Most cynical. And Jake was our chief resident, who was like the shining star of our program. He was like the doctor everybody wanted to be. He was the doctor you would want if you became ill. And he was just a remarkable human being. And in his final year of residency, he was diagnosed with this really terrible, terrible disease. And I'm still so angry at his disease. I often say, like, the name of the disease still is not something that I'm even willing to say. And he spent his last year doing what he loved, which was rounding on patients, going to grand rounds, taking care of his learners and his new wife and his family and friends. And he ended up dying. And it was such a hard time for me and for those of us at Michigan who loved him. And I think, it really, to me, I was in my mid 20s at the time. And I realized I didn't have a name for it at the time, but I realized now what had happened is I had made medicine into an idol. And I thought, medicine, if we just have enough NIH funding, if we just have enough time, if we just have enough resources, we're going to be able to overcome the problem of death. And I just, at some level, couldn't believe that we couldn't save one of our own people. I couldn't believe that we couldn't save Jake. And Jake actually had a disease that we had. It's a really rare disease, but we had like a world-renowned expert at our institution. The department chair of medicine at the time was an oncologist. And yet we couldn't save one of our own. Like he died on our watch. And I just was like, at the time, I had this really, I'll admit, like a bad way of thinking about things. I was like, if there was a God, I had heard there was a God. I heard he's all good and all powerful, and he lets Jake die at like 27, and he was going to go and be this cardiologist and help all these people. And you let this is a bad way to think. This is how I thought. And you let all these people, I was just giving my 20s, I thought, taking care of folks for 100 hours a week who I thought, in my opinion, right, in my hubris, were doing nothing but trying their hardest to kill themselves, right? Not taking care of themselves. In my mind, they weren't good people, right? And they were living to be 105. And
Right.
then Jake, who is like the shining star of our program, right, is gone. I'm like, God, if there's a God, like, how does this make sense? And I had seen case and case after that, right, of I took care of a younger mom at 35 who died. It was terrible disease, and young children being born, babies being born dead, and babies with brain tumors. When you just see awful things. And I was like, make it make sense. So it really was a question of like wrestling with the question of suffering. And so after Jake died, I think of like Jacob wrestling with like the theophany or the angel. Like, he came out of that encounter with a new name, as did I eventually in my baptism, but with like a limp, I've never really been the same after that. But again, I have learned to see things in a new way. And I had thought medicine could be like our savior. I had, organized my entire life around it because it was an idol. I had structured my entire day around it. I had put hopes onto medicine that it didn't deserve and that it couldn't hold. And when our idols come crashing down, it's painful, but the right order of thing can shine out of that darkness. And that's what happened with that. But yeah, Jake was really, I think, that sort of catalyst in terms of how I really couldn't avoid engaging with the topic of suffering in a way that was meaningful any longer because it became immensely real to me in that moment. Hmm. Hmm.
Um, for any medical student or internist listening, who may have dealt with similar episodes, devastating as they are, what advice do you have for them? How do they navigate
Yeah,
this?
yeah, yeah. So I think medicine has a way of valorizing or glamorizing the self-sufficiency of the physician. Like you just gotta put your head down and move on and put it aside and just like you have patients to take care of, which is true. But you just gotta carry on. So another person to go help. And that's true, but also if we don't process what we're doing and how we're thinking about things, it's not healthy, but we're also missing a lot of opportunities to be able to bring a different way of being in the world in medicine and sort of legitimize the fact that we suffer in this work also, and we need to talk about it, not just be self-sufficient. I mean, first of all, the self-sufficiency is a myth, but I would say, none of us are fully alive by ourselves. And so I would encourage students to, this is how the culture of medicine has changed by certain people showing that it's okay to talk about these things, that we grieve. Like my favorite verse when I think of professional identity formation is, Jesus wept. Jesus is the great physician.
Yeah.
If Jesus can have grief over loved ones, like we can too when people die. I think if there's a time when we in medicine, you know, aren't upset and moved by the death of one of our patients, there's something wrong with us. That callus is thick. Like you need to either rip that callus off, which is going to be painful, which is what happened to me, or you need to think about taking a break. Like you should be grieved, when a brother or sister, or a member of the human family is passed. So I would encourage them to find people that they can talk to about this. And I think for example, when I share with students and residents how I, have dealt with the suffering that I've seen in my career and the way that I try to have at least some degree of peace with it. For example, I again have hope in the resurrection of bodies and Jesus making everything new. And I, thank God I'm not in charge, God's in control. And I think about what I can do is pray for my patients. My boys and I pray for my patients. And having the Christian narrative and the Christian story that's so comforting to me. I'm not prescribing that to my students who don't hold a Christian worldview. I'm just showing a particularity of how I've dealt with it. And I think that's the students are looking to see how have you made this work? Like, how have you done this? Right. And if we're just sort of vague, you just gotta handle it, or you just gotta learn to cope. But how have you learned to cope? How have you managed this? And if they hear a particular narrative from myself or from Dr. Adam Bruch, who's a Jewish physician that I run the program on health, spirituality, and religion with, they hear how he handles it. They hear how somebody else in their particular tradition or context of help. That's what's helpful. They just want to hear how each person, right, has raised children or gotten married in residency or had a baby as an intern or felt through suffering. The particularities we shouldn't shy away from. It's actually helpful for the students to hear that. So I would encourage the students to not go through this by themselves, to find a mentor or other person, group of people that they can debrief with. And then if they have a particular worldview, let's say that they're Catholic, I would encourage them to find a local chapter of the Catholic Medical Association, or if there's a Hippocratic Society, or there's a chapter of CMDA, or there's a group of faculty that can be available. It's important that you just don't do it by yourself. I think that's the main take-home lesson.
Yeah. And I'll add to that too. While this Substack and podcast is exclusively devoted to the issue of Catholicism and culture,
Mhm.
Dr. Collier, you mentioned that when dealing with grief, it's important to validate when medical students rely on religion, whether it's Catholicism or
Hmm.
other
Hmm.
religions,
Hmm.
and just relying on those that faith to guide them through to that time and be able to talk about it, to share it. Too often we just leave that aside, and that will lead that leads to miseducation, or rather no education at all.
Yeah, no, it definitely leads to, I think in medicine, which I know most about, it leads to this disintegration of persons. And I think there's this maybe misappropriated idea of what religion is. Like people think that you can just take your religion on and off like a hat. Well, just, wear your religion when you go home. But in the hospital, you know, you can't wear that hat there here. And again, like people can't just oftentimes take their religion on and off. Like it's in their marrow, like it's who they are. It informs how they see the world. So again, people can't do that. And if they're made to feel like they do that, then moral distress happens. And then also, we think about this professional personal identity that we try to cultivate within the vocation, specifically within medicine. We're having more and more, thankfully, I think, people trying to bring other identities of themselves and not waiting to sort of, for example, we have a lot of residents and students who have children in training, which is great to see now that we have more of a humane training system. And I would say you wouldn't ask one of your students to say, oh, you just think of yourself as a mom in the evening and a physician during the day. She probably thinks of herself as a physician mom all the time. So we wouldn't ask other people to like disintegrate themselves. But for religious people, we would ask that. It doesn't make any sense. There was a great piece called The Emperor Wears No Clothes, Professionalism in Medical Education by Warren Kinghorn, who's a psychiatrist at Duke. And he helps run the Theology, Medicine, and Culture initiative there with Far Curlin. And he wrote about how medical education oftentimes co-ops or borrows words that historically have been rooted into religious traditions, words like compassion, which means to suffer with, right? Or words even like justice or love or charity. But they unroot them from the religious traditions. And then these terms in medicine, because they're not really anchored in anything that's thick with any meaning, but they're used in all these different mission statements and things, right? Professional identity formation. As R.J. Snell says, like these terms become thinned out so much until they're transparent, unable to bear the weight of actual living, because we're so afraid of engaging religious traditions or moral language. But again, not that we would prescribe in a non-sectarian or a public university one specific religion. We wouldn't promote one religion. But again, to have the students be exposed to thick dialogue around conversations that don't try to thin things out so that they're useless, but we can bring the fullness of each one of us, of who we are, to the conversation and the table, so that the discussion can get thick and rich. That's where people grow. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. In higher education, I think it's a particular problem specifically for certain types of faculty, religious faculty, and as we're finding with faculty surveys, specifically the marginalization or sometimes the not the hiring on hiring of conservative faculty as well. Yeah.
But moving on to your pro-life
Yeah.
advocacy,
Yeah.
yeah, how did that come about? I mean, you were an avowed pro-choice atheist. How did you become so vocal about your pro-life advocacy, and how have you sought to integrate that in your work?
Yeah. So I think, after my baptism in 2016, I still held on to my very strong pro-choice commitments. And I think there's a lot of reason for that. But I think a lot of us oftentimes will rationalize beliefs that we have, or, that belief really hadn't. I sort of had, again, I don't remember a time when I wasn't pro-choice. Like it was just part of the water in which I was raised. And if you had asked me about it, I would have said, how can I, like, again, there was no view that I had of how this could work. I was like, how could I be a self-respecting female physician scientist and be pro-life? Like, I don't see how that's possible. And I had just been raised with this view that abortion is an unquestioned good. I hadn't had the opportunity really to think about the arguments around it. Again, there was no thick discussion in any of my education around the topic of abortion. There was just like this frothy tribalism that I just became part of. Like this was like, this idea that if you're not totally for abortion all the way, then you are anti-woman, anti-science, and all that. I just bought into that. And then what happened in 2018, so this was 2 years after my baptism, I invited Professor Charles Camosy, who's a Catholic moral theologian, he's a pro-life person,
Yeah.
to the medical school to give a talk at my medical school program in health, spirituality, religion. He gave a talk about, like, again, why don't you don't need to leave your faith at the door to practice medicine. But I knew that he was pro-life, and we were at dinner that night, and I, was like, I know you're pro-life, but don't try to talk to me about abortion, because pro-lifers often try to talk to you about abortion, because like I don't want to talk about it, And he's like, he was so nice. He's like, I hear you. He's like, well, why don't you read my book? And his book is called Beyond the Abortion Wars. And I was like, I'll read your book, but there's like no way, like a Catholic male theologian who's is going to take down a physician scientist woman on abortion. I'm like, bless your heart, right? I'll read your book. But it was the first time, again, ever that I had had the opportunities to engage the arguments around abortion, not just the emotion around it, not just the tribalism about it, but actually like the arguments. This book is wonderful. Over the course of the year, Charlie was like a lovely conversation partner and stuck with me and took a lot of my frustration because I really, again, wrestled with some of these topics. And I remember waking up like a year later. This is going to sound very, evangelical of me. I woke up a year later, and I just was like, Jesus doesn't want us killing babies. Like whatever I believe about this topic, whatever is going to be easy for me to sort of continue to believe, I knew I had to change the way that I moved in the world. And I just knew at that point that abortion was wrong.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think as well the issue of abortion and euthanasia, IVF, these are highly emotionally charged
Totally.
issues that
Totally.
there's not really an opportunity for some sort of dialogue. And
That's
I,
right.
I think as well too,
That's right.
there's so much emotion around it that it stifles the ability to see the arguments, to treat the
That's right.
arguments as they are logically and see if they match up with your deeply held beliefs about these issues.
No, that's right. Actually, Trisha Bruce did a study looking at, she canvassed the US and looked at US adults' views on abortion. And her study found that actually, which was my experience, actually most US adults actually haven't had the opportunity to actually talk about abortion and think about the arguments and like really, think through the issue thoughtfully. And there is what you describe, right? It's called this like the chilling effect. There's a chill that's sometimes imposed on certain topics that are controversial, whether it be abortion, transgender medicine, physician-assisted suicide, IVF, because rightly so, there's a lot of suffering in these. These aren't just topics that float on the sky, like women and babies and people with terminal illness and transgender youth and their families, there's like real suffering happening with people here. And if we just don't recognize that and start talking about the philosophical, nature of these topics, we're missing the fact that there's actually real people in these conversations and making these decisions. And we need to sort of acknowledge that. And because there's a lot of trauma too in these spaces, then there's a lot of, I think, sometimes fear of engaging, but we can't let our emotions or our distress also keep us from the fact that we need to be able to get the evidence out for patients and families. We need to be able to talk about these topics with our learners because people's lives literally are at stake. So yeah, no, I do think that we need more opportunities to be able to talk through these things in academia and in the public that's civil, that's informed, evidence-based, and avoid some of the frothy arguments that sometimes then act just to sort of they devolve into ad hominem attacks. As soon as you talking about abortion, people claim that you're racist or anti-woman or anti-science. And then I'm like, well, can we actually talk about the topic? And then the chill happens and everyone's like then rightly afraid. They don't want to be called those things. So then people self-censor themselves. They don't write on the topic. They won't research these topics. They won't educate on these topics because, especially the minority view, because they're worried about being canceled or they're worried about an ad hominem attack. And so the chill serves to impoverish the educational milieu at our institutions when we don't talk about these topics. To the bereavement and the breathness of the, if that's a word, of the learner, and also then the trickle down to society. We don't have a right way to sort of talk through these topics in a way that makes sense and that can help people be informed, which is really what we need.
Yeah. On the point of pro-life advocacy,
Yeah.
how do you see this today? I imagine that at the University of Michigan, you've had the opportunity to maybe perhaps collaborate with pro-life advocates on campus, but
Mhm.
in the larger field of higher education. How do you see it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work to do. I think that, it can be challenging to do this work because, especially as a pro-life person, because it's the minority view in higher education without consequence. And I think, we are protected, obviously, with the university's done a great job actually trying to really champion viewpoint diversity. And again, actually, we just got an email, the faculty just got an email this morning from the interim president of the University of Michigan saying that, like, we were built on a First Amendment principle, and we need to be able to be respectful. And, so those protections are there, but the social costs, no one can really protect you from. And so, thinking about how to do this advocacy work, because I do feel like if there's something materially real about the moral status of our prenatal brothers and sisters, then like we need to defend them in a real way, whether that be involved in legislation or grassroots efforts or advocacy op-eds, that kind of thing. So I've done that, and also make sure that like I still am continue to create bonds of relationship with people at my place so that they understand like I'm very rooted with the University of Michigan. I love my colleagues. I'm open to students. I don't want my work also to be a barrier to relationship building either. So it's a fine balance.
Yeah. On the point of social costs, you mentioned that no one can really protect you from those.
Right.
But for pro-life advocates,
Mhm.
especially Catholic pro-life advocates who
Mhm.
are concerned about um, the social costs, what is your advice to them to navigate those?
Yeah, I mean, the social costs are real, and that can be from sort of a soft canceling within academia. So, for example, like I've been dropped from projects, people don't want to work with me on running courses or sitting with me on panels at academic meetings, or, there's that, right? There's also, sometimes you hear about people who are removed from administrative or educational positions, and they'll find some other reason to remove you based on some, uh, you know, bureaucratic type of metric. But, people wonder sometimes if it's more so because of, being controversial or involved in certain work, which hopefully that shouldn't happen that much. But it's more around your colleagues and the soft canceling that can happen with these opportunities that a lot of us do need for promotion eventually, right? Sitting on boards or serving on panels or serving on being course directors of something. And there's
Graham.
nothing that you can really do about that. I think that my advice about that would be twofold. I think one is that, the scriptures say, that, you will count the cost, for bearing my name. Jesus says that to Paul, and there will be a cost for bearing the name of Jesus Christ. And, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness. I mean, that's just, counting the cost as part of the Christian life, I would say. Um, I would say my second piece of advice, besides counting the cost, and know this is something that's actually pretty much guaranteed, is building your network of friendlies. So the friendlies are not only people at your institution who are like-minded to you that can help you in times of controversy to write letters or to, you have your sponsor that can navigate conversations at levels where you can't navigate, or to pray for you. These are people also who don't agree with you, but will defend your right to be here. So, for example, when the white coat ceremony thing happened, there was a faculty member who I've sat with on a long-standing committee for years, and he emailed me and he was like, "Kristin, like, I totally think you're wrong about this abortion topic, but like, I will totally go to the regents if I have to defend your right to speak here." So again, these are your friendlies, and you build your friendlies by leaning into relationships at your place.
Mm. For those in my audience,
Mm,
you may be, Catholic physicians. Dr. Collier just talked about discernment, and
mm,
I feel, especially
mm.
for my physician friends, that their discernment, it doesn't mean that you can't be tactful about
Yeah,
things,
right. I
when
mean,
to speak, not
100%.
to speak. And I think that's a great point that, we often just, associate discernment with finding your vocation, religious life, but it
Right,
also means to
right.
be tactful, to count the cost, as it were, to count the
Mhm.
cost of certain decisions. Like you can't. Does it? I mean, it's a common proverb. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right, that's right.
Yeah. So when to speak, when not to speak. That mode of discernment is part of the larger meaning of discernment. I feel that's been missing on the part of medical students, people who are people of faith and who want to advocate on these issues.
I mean, that's right. I think, there's nothing, I think sometimes when I talk about being somewhat strategic about this, people think that that's anti-Christian or something like that. But honestly, like, I don't know I don't know if strategic is the right word, but yeah, there's this idea of discernment of like understanding again when to speak and when not to. And you can only do that with being able to be open to like, understanding God's will for you. And I think of, this idea of like safety, like, we want to be as beings with creaturely comforts that feel good. We want to be safe. And I used to think that, safety was the absence of danger. And really now my idea of safety is like not the absence of danger, but the presence of the Lord. You think about basically like the Lord providing that sort of like hedge or that wall of fire around his people. Like just the danger was there. Safety wasn't, he didn't take the people away, the danger away. He provided his presence for you. So that's how I think of that. And I think that there's this beautiful poem that Bernard Shaw wrote for about Saint Joan of Arc. And the play has Saint Joan like talking to big leaders, like, royalty. And, she talks to, the leaders and they ask her, Joan, like, how do you know what to do? Like, how do you know exactly what strategy, like, let's say, to sort of roll with? And she says, I listen to the voices. And they're like, the voices, like, and the king says, why did the voices come to you and not to me? I'm the king. And she says something like, well, they do come to you, but you do not listen for them. You have not sat in the evening in the fields listening for them. If you had listened with your heart and listened to the ringing of the bells after they stopped ringing, something like that, you will have heard the voices as well as do I. And so that poem speaks this idea of like making time to listen, making time for silence, making time to sort of understand God's will for you, which takes prayer and discernment. But you can't do that without time and silence also, which doctors aren't good with. And then trying to do this again in community with running these things by your sponsor, by your spiritual advisor, by your mentor, because there is discernment, I would say, that is required to be able to do this work well.
So let's shift to
Mhm.
your role as director of your the University of Michigan Medical Schools program on health, spirituality, and religion. I was looking up, a couple of days ago, how many programs are like this in the entire country, and there are only a handful of these.
Oh,
So maybe including Harvard, which you mentioned earlier.
yeah.
But what is the aim of this program? And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the aim of the program is to provide intersections for our medical students at the opportunities at the intersection of medicine and religion and spirituality. So when we say we provide opportunities at the intersection of faith and medicine, that can look like very various things. So our program is, like you said, is the University of Michigan Medical School program in health, spirituality, and religion. So we're rooted at the medical school. So these opportunities are for medical students so that we have opportunities for other people to join in. So those opportunities, for example, are we have an endowed speaker series. It's called the Wall Family Speaker Series on health, spirituality, and religion. That is open to anybody. Most of the talks are by Zoom. We have people come from all over the country, physicians, bioethicists, other scholars, talking about something about the intersection of medicine and religion. That can be their research. It can be a personal testimony about how their vocational commitments have been shaped by their faith commitments, or some other topic that's related to medicine and has a view of religion within it. We have, for example, for this semester, we have Leah Labresco coming
yeah.
actually on campus in September talking about weakness in medicine and sort of the dignity of dependence, which is her new book. We're having Lydia Dugdale speak in October. She's a physician ethicist about sort of the ethics around designer babies. We have Liz Lev, who's an art historian from Rome. She's going to be talking to us in December about art and medicine, she's maybe going to be talking about Sistine Chapel or maybe Christ the Healer. So we have various topics, and anyone actually can join us for those talks to sort of understand who else is interested in these topics and then get ideas for research projects, et cetera. We also have in the program, we have a group of student fellows. So we have a group of you can apply to be a student fellow as a senior medical student. So we have a handful of student fellows who have various religious backgrounds. We get together with them regularly. So for example, the first event of the academic year will be in September. They'll come to the house and they each have to bring, the topic is called, the first session is called Who Do You Say That I Am? And they each bring a copy of a passage or a line from scripture or a religious text or a spiritual text that they feel speaks as to why they're in medicine. Again, speaking about like their why. But we get together with them every month and we think about, again, conversations just for the fellows. We also have a group of students that we mentor, either professionally, personally around research projects, vocational discernment, ideas around how they can see themselves as an integrated religious professional person. We also have courses. So we have curricula that runs throughout the medical school. We have required curriculum for all students and what's called the sort of the preclinical pre-branches curriculum. And then we have an elective in the branches where it's a non-clinical elective where we write and read and discuss topics. For example, there's a session where we have usually a Catholic priest, an imam, and a rabbi coming to talk about the Abrahamic religion's view of the body. And then the medical students talk about how they've seen the body, whether it be through gross dissection lab, autopsy service, and how medicine oftentimes use the body and how the Abrahamic religions view the body, and think about how this informs sometimes topics around brain death, organ donation, amputations, that kind of thing. We also have a research arm or writing arm. So some of the publications you listed in my bio have come out of our writing arm. And then we have a public facing arm of the program where we want to legitimize this topic as a legitimate topic of discussion within academic medicine. So I give a lot of public talks across the country on like things like physician conscience, human dignity, the intersection of medicine and religion, do a lot of writing in like sort of non-peer-reviewed format so people have access to it, like the New York Times piece or public discourse, Notre Dame's Church Life Journal. So yeah, our goal is to like legitimize that medicine and religion can be topics that can be discussed together in an academic setting, build community around this. We pay for our student fellows to go to the Conference of Medicine and Religion each year, which is a great way to present their scholarly work. We fund their research projects, we mentor them, we get together one-on-one, but also in with the fellows. We have the speaker series, we have the courses. So we have, what we've tried to do intentionally is build different points of entry for different people who may want to engage with us, either with research, with talks, with discussion, with mentoring. And it's been a really awesome journey. We started the program in 2017, and I run it with Dr. Adam Baruch, who's a Jewish OB-GYN at Michigan, and it's been really cool. And again, our student fellows come from different backgrounds. Sometimes people ask us, well, how are you different than like CMDA or the Jewish Medical Students Association or CMA? We still have those chapters at Michigan and they do great work, and we're not trying to duplicate that work, but this is different because we bring students from various religions and trying to show them that like, you can lean into who you are in this program, and that's how we're going to learn and grow and have rich conversation. And so we're really happy that the university has continued to support us being who we are at the medical school. And one thing you said, you like sort of benchmark to see if other institutions have similar programs. We are actually very unique in that we are like the only, I think, public institution in the country who has a program like ours actually under the medical school umbrella that isn't just like a research silo or isn't like associated with a divinity school like Duke's is, or
Yeah.
isn't somehow ours is actually intra the medical school. So it's been really an awesome opportunity for us to help shape the culture and support the university and the work, it says it wants to do.
As we round up the interview here, I do have to ask you about
Mhm.
the modern medicine in the time of artificial intelligence, AI. So,
Mm.
um, what can the humanities do, and how have you seen this, modern medicine? How has it changed, for better or for worse, in this time of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, so I think about the technology that we all benefit from within medicine that again, I'm very thankful to have, but like the risks of having more of a technical lens within medicine and like losing sight of the patient in front of us that we talked about there at the beginning of this interview. So for example, I always tell this story. I think it's an interesting story. Um, we think about I would call it a technology of like the stethoscope, for example. Dr. Laennec, who was a French physician, developed the stethoscope a few hundred years ago. And he developed it because he felt like it was improper actually to put his ear directly on a female patient's chest to auscultate the heart. So he remembered as a kid where he would roll up paper tubing and he could hear through it that he sort of did that same thing, and the sound can be transmitted actually very well to your ear. And then the modern stethoscope was invented. And then we've had all this technology since that time. We've had the semiconductor, we've had the CT scanner, we've had X-rays, right? And each step actually, whether it be removing your ear from the patient's chest to scanning the patient and not percussing and auscultating the abdomen, removes us a little bit from the patient. And I wonder about AIs, right? Potential to even remove us farther.
Mm.
There's so much to say about AI, but I guess what I would say is that, again, as you said, and I've said again, that medicine is not just a technical endeavor, it's a moral one, remembering who's at the center of this encounter, someone made by God in his image with inviolable worth and inherent dignity. And a machine can never know them. Only I can know them as someone who take care of them over the past, usually I take care of people over decades. And when we reduce patients to symptoms or diseases, we, of course, take care of diseases and I think about symptoms, but I can never forget that those symptoms and diseases are in a mother, like a father, someone's best friend, the most important person in someone's whole life that I'm taking care of. A machine can never understand that. A medicine can never understand anything. It cannot understand as a machine. And so when I think about, in my work in primary care, taking care, we think like 60% of US adults have one chronic illness, probably 40% have more than one. These are chronic illnesses that I hope for cures. We're probably on the side of heaven we're never going to have a cure for. I take care of patients with incurable things, addiction, chronic pain. But even within those spaces, when we think about whole person care, healing can still occur. And, there's no way that a machine can like understand illness, which is the lived context of disease, understand patients' most deeply held values, navigate nuance in a way. It risks, I think, stripping people down to a list of symptoms and a list of sort of diseases, which again loses the very essence of who we want in medicine to treat. There's this really good example in this movie that I sometimes refer to when talking about AI. I don't know if you've seen it. I don't know if you're a sci-fi fan, but it's called Passengers.
Mm.
Have you heard of that movie? It's with Christopher Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
such
yeah.
a cool movie. So it's a movie about basically like not so distant future where Earth has become uninhabitable, and everyone sort of gets into this ladder to be put on a ship and sort of transferred to this new Jerusalem, like this new utopia that's been designed for people. But it's so far away that they have to place people on hibernation to get there because you would die if you were alive for hundreds of years on the ship. So in the movie, because a series of events, Christopher Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence's character wake up and they have to figure out what to do, and they have to try to like turn the ship around or do something. So they wake up the captain of the ship, who's Lawrence Fishburne. So at some point in the movie, Lawrence Fishburne gets ill and they take him to the sick bay on the ship and they put him in this machine, and the machine like scans him very quickly and out spits like a list of like everything that's wrong with him. And then out of his other slot comes like a sort of collection of pills that he takes, and he looks in his hand. Then he takes the medication, and then in the next scene, he dies. And then you see Jennifer Lawrence and Christopher Pratt like pushing his body out into space, and he floats away. And so when I show that scene to people, I ask them if that's healthcare. He got a very quick list of everything that was wrong with him. It probably was like quicker than I am, and actually probably sometimes more accurate than I am. It gave him probably the appropriate medical treatment. He probably got a mix of like palliative sedation or other like palliating medications for whatever was bothering him. So like, what's the problem, right? The problem is there was no care delivered. It's not healthcare, right? That's not healthcare. Like, you need a diagnosis, right? You need to be able to understand what the treatments are. Those are necessary, but those are insufficient for good healthcare. There was no like bearing witness to suffering. There was no acknowledgement of his existential grief. There was no offering of reconciliation at end of life with the Lord or with family or friends. There was no attentiveness to like even who he is or who he was or what his hopes are for good death, nothing. So again, like we have a lot to learn about, I think, the benefits and the limits of AI. And I just hope that, because I would say medicine is such a high stakes profession, we can't ever allow the public to be the guinea pig for us to figure this out. We need to be able to be ahead of it and not let AI sort of drive itself. Like we still are in control here. And the other thing I really care about, besides like again, a loss of the human person within the framework of a technocratic paradigm, is the de-skilling of physicians. If I outsource my medical decision making, my clinical reasoning, my ability to generate differential diagnosis to a machine, then like I will de-skill me, right? And then if I don't learn how to think like a doctor, am I even a doctor? Like what is, again, the philosophical question, like what is a doctor, right? So again, when we should let AI be part of medical education, is it only once you finish fellowship or residency training? Do the medical students, should they have access to it? What are the risks of that? But I always think of Linac moving his ear away. The risk of separating us from the patient, reducing the patient to a list of symptoms and diseases, not being able to take patients' most deeply held concerns into the care plan, and then not really being able to care. Only humans can care for other human beings. So yeah, there's a big threat. I think anytime we introduce anything into that sacred, I would say the sacred diet or the sacred covenant of patient physician, anything, something else comes into that relationship, it risks the disrupting that relationship, not always for the good. So we have to be, I would say, ahead of the curve by not bringing just physicians in these conversations about AI and healthcare, but theologians, philosophers, ethicists, et cetera, so that we can drive the ship and not let AI drive us.
Shifting just to the last couple of questions I have for
Sure.
on the role of your faith, your Christian
Mhm.
faith.
Yeah.
How has that informed your work? And I would say, how did you how is it integrated in your work?
Yeah. So after my baptism, I started again, like sort of ripping that callus off and really trying to fill in the massive craters in my education, sort of to think more philosophically and theologically about things. I realized that, again, I myself didn't want to live a disintegrated person. I didn't want to think of myself as being a Christian sort of on the weekends and like an academic physician during the week. I wanted to be, I wanted to be integrated and to think about, can my work totally reflect the work of a Christian physician? And so, I mean, I would say, right, isn't the encounter with Christ like a changed a life, And so I completely rehabilitated and changed my academic focus so that, I would say that I operate now from this, this philosophy or this theology of medicine that I've been able to continue to hone, where that I'm at a privileged point to be able to do this. But I would say now that all the work that I do, whether it's research, writing, teaching, education, committee work, panels, patient care, I want that work to speak to the reality of human beings made in the image of God, who have inviolable worth and inherent dignity, and think about promoting a vision of like whole person care that attends to people, not just as biological machines, but people who are the image bearers. And so all my academic work, my publishing, the work with the program, my patient care. I also do volunteer work in the women's prison, training prison palliative health aides, because I believe people are worth more than their worst deed. All that work came into alignment with thinking about defining human dignity in medicine, specifically defining human dignity in human persons from practices that are an affront to human dignity, So thinking about my advocacy work, my writing, and my op-ed. So all that work came into alignment. Whereas before my baptism, my work, I would say, didn't speak to really any thread. Like I would speak on hypertension and women's health and updates in contraception and all these things, right? But once I had the clarity of the moral structure of reality in front of me after my baptism and the crisis at hand that has, I think, the potential, if we, I think, rope the vocation of medicine into the business of death and adopt wholeheartedly the practices that aim directly at the death of a member of Homo sapiens, like an abortion and physician-assisted suicide, that work was so important and so pressing that I was like, I can't work on these other things anymore, you know? So it became the focus of my work. So for example, if I get I just got last year an invitation to give a talk at the University Health Service, which is the on-campus health service that takes care of students and some faculty and staff. And they were like, hey, can you come give a talk to our faculty and staff around like updates in like pharyngitis, which is like an infectious condition of the throat. And I could have done that, you know, but I was like, that doesn't align with like, again, my philosophy of medicine, right? So I said, you know, no, thank you. I sort of suggested a mentee of mine who actually needs those types of talks for her CV. And what I said was, actually, think about like opening or knocking on doors. I was like, but actually, what about if I come and I give a talk on like sort of human dignity and how we view human dignity in medicine? And she was like, well, that's interesting. Sure. So I went and gave a talk about human dignity, you know, which is like I ask, you know, healthcare professionals these questions of like, do you think human beings matter? Why do you think they matter? And can you defend sort of your answer? And so we talked about inherent human dignity and how people have lost this view of inherent human dignity and the consequences thereof of having tiers of human dignity and the ableism and racism and ageism that's still in medicine. And it was like, that felt good to give that talk because it aligns with the work that I want to do. I could have given the pharyngitis talk, but I said no, because it doesn't align now with like the work that I'm called to do. So every talk, every committee, every panel, every paper, every op-ed, I want to speak to this narrative thread of like, there is something real about people and their dignity needs to be defended, especially if a vocation is going to defend inherent human dignity, it should be the vocation of medicine. So that's how my work has been different since my baptism in a very real way.
A final two-part question for you.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
I talking about the humanities, and in higher education today, there's I think a false dichotomy of oh, here are the
I
here's
know.
STEM sciences, and there's the humanities. They have nothing to do with each other whatsoever.
Mm,
Um, how do you see the role of
mhm,
humanities today? And the second part of your
mhm.
my question is, um, are you hopeful for the future as a Christian physician? And what advice do you have for, Christian physicians, especially for listeners of my podcast, and this episode, Catholic physicians
Yes.
who are seeing all these developments and who are afraid for the future or less hopeful?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with like that last question. Like, for sure. I mean, I wax and wane with my hopefulness, but I do think that in the mindset of like, let's say the work that has to be done, there's so much work that has to be done and really important work with defending human dignity and defending medicine, which was a really sacred vocation from being roped into the business of death, which would literally disintegrate the profession. And I think of all the beautiful things that God has created, you know, sex, marriage, vocations that matter deeply, like medicine. And of course, those things that matter deeply, that's where like the enemy is going to want to attack. Like we think of like demonic forces or principalities and powers, however you want to name that. Of course, like medicine would be something that would be under attack because that actually matters and is beautiful and is real. And so medicine needs defending. And also in this work of defending human dignity and, you know, thinking about all the work that has to be done, also remembering that like, you know, Jesus has like won the battle, you know, and like we're just here to like sort of like toe the line until he returns, you know. So that's like where our eternal hope rests. Like I think of Jeff Bishop, Dr. Jeff Bishop, who's an MD PhD. He's an internist and a ethicist. He runs the St. Louis University healthcare ethics program there. And he said medicine, oftentimes secular medicine, has lost all hope because it has lost all view of like transcendental goods, metaphysical goods, and the eschaton. And so without a view of that, he wrote a book called The Anticipatory Corpse, which is like a radical book, but he says actually the dead body, the corpse, is the normative body in medicine because it's the end to which medicine aims because there's nothing beyond death. And so medicine then becomes a nihilistic practice that has lost all hope and lost all meaning. And that's like where we find ourselves. And I think a lot of secular medical students won't maybe say this out loud because it's like not common to say, but they feel like, what is the point of all this? Everyone dies, like what do we do? What are we even doing? Right. Because they don't have the horizon, right, of the eschaton. So in all that, of course, I have hope, like St. Paul talks about to the people in Thessalonica, that like we do not grieve like people who have no hope, right? Like there's so much grief that happens within the work of medicine, but I have hope because I know the Lord Jesus Christ. In terms of the humanities question, a professor, he's a philosopher, Bo Bonner, and I wrote a piece for Notre Dame's Church Life Journal actually about applying a framework of St. John Henry Newman's The Idea of a University to Medical Education. And I really still love that piece. It was like, again, thinking about the holes in my education. I didn't know who John Henry Newman was, and through the help of Bo Bonner and some other friends, I was able to engage with his work and think about how his seminal work, Idea of a University, fits into medical education. And I love his ideas here that I just want to mention. So John Henry Newman correctly believed, right, that like there is, he called it the circle of knowledge. Like there is like the totality, which we all should strive to like understand this, the moral structure of reality. And he said for a university, you should, and higher education, there are all these disciplines that you should really strive to have your learners be able to engage in. And that includes obviously, the STEM, the hard sciences, but also like theology, which is, the queen of the sciences. I would agree with you there. But he said what's happened, right? And you'll see this, you've seen this. I mean, I see this all the time on Twitter where like departments and universities are cutting like the theology department, the philosophy department. And what Newman would say is that instead of like keeping that place for that wedge of this pie, of this circle of knowledge, which again is the circle of reality, of the moral structure of reality, what happens is the other fields sort of close up and try to answer questions within theology that they have no business answering. And their expertise, like medicine, that's happened in medicine. Medicine has tried to answer questions that happened during the pandemic, or medicine all of a sudden we thought we like knew all these things, right? Because we thought we could sort of keep its space for it, but actually the other fields close up around it. And Newman would say that philosophy is the fork by which you engage the entire circle of knowledge of all these fields. And so I do think thinking about the breadth of these topics, because as Newman would say, that they all intersect. And so you aren't able to see your STEM field properly without a view as a human being who is engaged existential questions of suffering, life, and death through the humanities. You're not going to see your own field properly, and if you don't see it properly, you might have an over-exaggerated view of your field, and you can erroneously think that it can answer questions that it can't. So Newman would say that it's the job of educators actually to make sure that learners have exposure to the breadth of the circle of knowledge, be able to think philosophically, which is Newman would call this habit of mind that has to be cultivated. And that's done, he would say, in and through engagement with faculty. And he would say, Newman said something like, without the sort of impact of your faculty on your learner, in dialogue, forming you as a person to go out to be a member of society, not just a cog in some type of economic machine to get a job, right? Which is oftentimes what people think college is for. Then your university is going to be like an Arctic winter. We need faculty and students dedicated to thinking about universities forming you as a human person, to go out live properly with virtues that have been cultivated through this philosophical habit of mind, to go into the world, which is a very different idea that's contra Newman of like, I'm in college to like study this one thing to be able to get a job. Getting a job is important, but actually even more important than that is actually being a good person and being formed as a citizen, a person who's been cultivated with this habit of mind to be able to think through whatever it is in the world in a way that's rightly ordered. Yeah, so anyone that wants to read that piece, it's in Notre Dame's Church Life Journal a couple years ago. About John Henry Newman and medical education in particular. But yeah, the idea of university could be applied to sort of any field. Mm-hmm.
Well, Dr. Collier, I think this conversation could go for hours and hours and
It's
hours.
been super fun chatting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been super fun, and again, the aim of this conversation is, of course, it's a we we delve here into the issue of Catholicism and modern culture, but I think this is important, especially for Catholic
Yeah.
physicians, and this can hopefully inform their perspective on modern medicine. But Dr. Collier, I thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you. And as I mentioned, we could have gone literally for hours and hours and hours on this. Perhaps in a future interview, maybe if I visit the University of Michigan sometime, we can have a talk in person.
It'd be great. That'd
Yeah,
be great. Yeah,
yeah.
it'd be great. Yeah, there's so many topics, right, that we could talk about at a future date, like specifically getting into the specific idea of physician conscience protection, which is specifically relevant, I would say, for Catholic and Christian physicians. It's currently under threat. Specific topics like physician-assisted suicide, which is not yet in Michigan, but might be if efforts are successful to get it in. So yes, I look forward to future conversations, hopefully in person or on the podcast in the future.